Hello and welcome to Bio Lessons to Go. I am Mr. Dove, and this is Alternate Patterns of Inheritance, Sex-Linked Genes. Let us examine the pedigree for the royal family, traced all the way back to Queen Victoria. The pedigree for the royal family contains a genetic disorder known as hemophilia. Those that suffer from hemophilia are called hemophiliacs. And hemophiliacs have a problem clotting their blood. When they get a small cut or bruise, it will tend to bleed profusely, and a significant enough wound could actually lead to death through exsanguination. Now, when we look at the pattern that emerges as individuals inherit hemophilia, you might notice something. All of those individuals that are inheriting the hemophilia happen to be boys. So since mostly boys inherit this characteristic, it suggests that the gene for hemophilia is linked to the chromosomes that determine gender. So the sex chromosomes are the chromosomes that determine our gender. Females are XX and males are XY. So when a trait seems to be inherited through gender, it might be as a result of being linked to these chromosomes. Now, normally, when genes are on separate chromosomes, they can sort independently of each other during meiosis. So, here we have 4 chromosomes containing the alleles, the B alleles, and R alleles. Because the alleles are on separate chromosomes, when the chromosomes separate during meiosis, the B allele the large B allele can go with the capital R. The capital B can go with the lowercase r. The lowercase b can go with the capital R, or the lowercase b can go with the recessive r. And so the alleles can sort independently. They can go their separate ways. It's kind of like if two people are in 2 different automobiles. Because they're in different automobiles, they can go in opposite directions. They can go independently of one another. But if genes are located on the same chromosome, they tend to stay together during meiosis. So for example, if the dominant alleles were on the same chromosome and the recessive alleles were on the same chromosome, when they separated during meiosis, they have to go together. They're linked together. It's kind of like being 2 people in the same car. They tend to have to go together when they're moving to their destination because they're in the same car. The scientist that discovered this phenomenon's name is Thomas Hunt Morgan. Now, he observed these link genes when working with fruit flies, scientific name Drosophila melanogaster. Now, as he was looking at fruit flies, he was looking at all of their many traits. Fruit flies happen to have the same genetic determination as humans. Males are XY and females are XX. So this is a fruit fly. Have you ever seen those little flies plaguing your fruit bowl in your kitchen during the summertime? That's these little teensy tiny flies. This is one of them. Now, normally, fruit flies have red eyes. Now, in breeding thousands upon thousands of flies, Morgan actually stumbled upon a white-eyed mutant. And so he was curious about this white-eyed trait. How is it inherited? What pattern might we see? So, like any good scientist, he crossed a red-eyed fruit fly with a white-eyed fruit fly to see what would happen. All of the offspring had red eyes. So what does that tell us? Red eyes must be dominant. So Morgan was curious what pattern might emerge if he crossed 2 of the hybrid red-eyed fruit flies. So in doing the cross, he found that once again the white-eye trait came back. So Mendel's principle of segregation was held intact. We had a approximately 3-to-1 ratio of red to white-eyed fruit flies. Once again, kind of following what we would expect. But something interesting occurred. He only found males in this generation that had white eyes. So he had to think about that for a little bit to figure out what might be explaining that. His best explanation was that the white-eyed trait must be linked to the X chromosome. So the eye color trait is linked to X chromosome, and the boys would show it first because they only have one X. So if white is recessive, there's nothing on the Y to mask it or cover it up. And so if the eye trait is linked to the X chromosome, that would explain why only males have that trait. A Punnett square can actually predict this. We have our red-eyed male. Only has one eye color gene because there's nothing on the Y. We have our red-eye female who's hybrid for red eyes. She's got the red-eye gene, but then she has one white-eye trait. She has red eyes because the red dominates the white. So our first potential offspring is XX. It's a female, purebred for red eyes. The next potential offspring is a male XY who's red eyes because there's nothing on the Y to change it. Plus red is dominant. Our next potential offspring would be a red-eyed female. It's female because it's XX, and red eyes because the red gene will mask the white one. And then the last potential offspring is going to be a white-eyed male. So we have our male because it's XY. It's a white eye allele, but there's nothing on the Y to be able to mask that, and so they appear white-eyed. So we have red-eyed female, red-eye male, red-eye female, white-eyed male. So under what conditions might we get a white-eyed female? What would it take for a female to be born that has white eyes? Well, only way for that to happen is if both parents can give the white allele. So we have a white-eyed male, and then we'll have a red-eyed female who happens to carry the trait. And so the first offspring will be a red-eyed female, then we'll have a red-eyed male, and then here is our first female who is white because she only received white genes. And then lastly we have our white-eyed male because he's a male XY with the white gene, nothing on the Y to cover it up. So in order to have a white-eyed female, you have to have both parents passing on that particular trait. Now, like fruit flies, humans have many sex-linked traits. Red-green color blindness, for instance, is sex-linked. If you are red-green colorblind, you would not be able to see the number 7 amongst all of these dots. There's a sex-linked form of albinism. Hemophilia that we talked about in the beginning is sex-linked. Now, not all sex-linked traits are recessive. Some are actually dominant. There are even some characteristics that are Y-linked and will only be seen in males. An example of this would be ear hair. This is the ear hair trait. So if we imagine that we have this gentleman here who has the gene for ear hair, and of course it's on the Y chromosome, and marries this young lady here who does not have the gene because she's XX, when we do the Punnett square, who gets the ear hair trait? Only the sons. Now, a question might arise. Can linked genes ever separate? Is there a time during meiosis when parts of genes might share components and swap places and separate from each other? Well, Alfred Sturtevant, while working with Morgan, discovered that they could separate through the process of crossing over. What he did is he crossed a heterozygous female for 3 linked traits with a recessive male for the same traits. So the female is heterozygous for brown body, red eyes, and large wings. The male, because it's X-linked traits, has the yellow body, the white eyes, and the miniature wings. Now, if linked genes never separated, the Punnett square would show us that 50% should have the dominant traits and 50% should have the recessive traits. So our Punnett square says that because the male has the Y, half of the males will express only the dominants or the recessives. Because the male is carrying the recessives and the female can pass on the recessives, 50% of the females should have the dominant traits and 50% should show the recessives. But we don't see this. After examining 10,495 fruit flies, Sturtevant found that only about 2/3 showed that expected ratio, that expected phenotype. The remaining were mixtures or recombinations of those dominant and recessive traits. So we found different combinations, so those linked genes seem to be separating. He concluded that the only way that the brown and the yellow could separate from, say, the red and the white eyed trait would be through crossing over. So when those alleles cross over, we'll get brand new combinations. So that brown body could be inherited with red eyes, and that yellow body could be inherited with white eyes. Now, crossing over then, what it'll do is it gives you that additional genetic variation, and that's what adds to the diversity that is found in all living things. Now, crossing over actually happens to happen more often when genes are farther apart on a chromosome. For example, what words would be more likely to separate away from each other? Would house be more likely to separate from boat, or would house be more likely to separate from car if we were to tear this paper in half? Well, the house would be more likely to separate from the boat because they're further away. There are many more tear opportunities between the house and the boat than there is between the house and the car. So if these were genes on a chromosome, the house gene would be able to separate from the boat gene more readily because it's further away. And this makes sense because the body color and the wing color have a greater crossover at 3,454 than, say for instance, our body and eye color, because they're closer together with only 60 combinations seen. So that lower frequency is due to their closeness on the chromosome. So in terms of our big picture here, genes are typically inherited independently from each other as long as they're on different chromosomes. When they're on the same chromosome, they're going to go together. But they can separate, and the only way that they can separate is through the process of crossing over. Hopefully, this helps to explain the idea of sex-linked inheritance, and with a little extra review, you'll be able to comfortably solve pedigrees and Punnett squares dealing with sex-linked inheritance.